The night was supposed to be perfect. Crystal chandeliers glowed softly above a room filled with wealth, laughter, and expensive suits. Guests spoke in low voices, glasses clinked, and music floated gently through the air. And in the middle of it all, she moved quietly between tables, trying not to be noticed. Just a waitress doing her job, until everything went wrong. A sharp laugh cut through the room. Then suddenly, a glass tipped. Red wine splashed across her chest, staining her uniform as the man in front of her leaned back and laughed like it was the funniest thing he had ever seen. People turned to look. Some gasped, some whispered, but no one stepped forward. She froze, humiliated, her hands trembling as the laughter grew louder. The man didn't apologize. He didn't care. To him, she was just another nobody. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that one small moment had already been seen by the wrong person. And before the night was over, that single act of cruelty would quietly change her life forever. If you enjoy powerful stories like this, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Because this night was only the beginning. The club was known for one thing: privacy. No cameras, no loud arguments, no scandals that made it outside those doors. Only the richest and most powerful people were allowed inside, and even among them, there were levels. Some came to be seen. Others came so no one would ever notice them at all. She belonged to the second group. Moving quietly between tables, she carried trays heavier than they looked, her steps careful, her smile polite, but small. She had only been working at the club for a few months, but she had already learned the most important rule: stay invisible. The less they noticed you, the easier the night would be. Her name was Mara. Most guests never asked for it. To them, she was just waitress, or a quick hand signal when their glass needed refilling. She didn't take it personally. This job wasn't about pride. It was about survival. Every shift meant money for rent, money for food, money to send back home to her younger brother, who still believed she worked in a fancy hotel and not a place where people treated you like part of the furniture. That night, the club was busier than usual. Luxury cars had lined up outside for nearly an hour. The private casino area was glowing under warm, golden lights, and the restaurant section was filled with the low hum of conversation and laughter. Important people were celebrating something. Mara didn't know what, and she didn't ask. She just worked. From table to table, she moved carefully, memorizing faces, remembering orders, avoiding eye contact with the ones who looked impatient. Some guests were kind, some ignored her completely, though a few looked at her like she didn't belong in the same room as them. She had gotten used to all of it. Still, she tried her best to do everything right. She adjusted a chair for an elderly man. She replaced a fork someone dropped before they even noticed. She apologized softly whenever she passed too close to a table. No one clapped for that kind of effort, but she kept going. Near the center of the room, a group of well-dressed men had taken over one of the larger tables. Their voices were louder than the others, their laughter sharper. Expensive watches flashed under the light as they raised their glasses, talking about deals and numbers she didn't understand. One of them stood out, not because he was the richest, but because he was the loudest. He leaned back in his chair like he owned the place, speaking over people, to laughing at his own jokes. The others followed his lead, nodding quickly, smiling when he smiled. Mara had seen that type before, the kind of man who expected the world to move when he spoke. She approached their table carefully, tray balanced against her palm. "Excuse me, sir," she said gently. Would you like a refill? He barely looked at her at first, just pushed his glass forward, without a word. As she reached to pour the wine, one of the men said something that made the loud one burst into laughter. He turned suddenly, his elbow knocking into the glass just as Mara tilted the bottle. The moment happened too fast. The glass tipped, the bottle slipped, and a deep red splash spread across the front of her white shirt. The table went silent for half a second. Then he started laughing. Not a small laugh, a loud, a careless one. He leaned back, pointing at the stain as if it were a joke meant just for him. Look at that, he said between laughs. You people can't even do one simple job right. Heat rushed to Mara's face. Her hands froze around the bottle as the red stain slowly spread across the fabric. She opened her mouth to apologize, but the words got stuck in her throat. A few people at nearby tables turned to look. No one stood up. No one said anything. And the man just kept laughing. Mara didn't remember walking away from the table. One moment she was standing there, the laughter still ringing in her ears, the stain spreading across her shirt. The next, she was pushing through the staff door at the side of the room, her chest tight, her vision slightly blurred. The noise from the main hall faded the moment the door closed behind her. Back there, everything was different. No chandeliers, no laughter, no expensive suits. Just the low hum of the kitchen, the clatter of plates, and the tired faces of people who worked too hard for too little. She set the tray down with shaking hands. One of the older waitresses noticed her immediately. Mara, what happened? She asked, stepping closer. Mara looked down at her shirt. The red stain had soaked through the fabric, darker now, harder to ignore. I spilled wine, she said softly, her voice barely steady. The older woman didn't ask anything else. She just reached for a cloth and began gently dabbing at the stain, like a mother trying to fix something she knew couldn't be fixed. From the corner of the room, a young waiter muttered, "Was it that loud table again?" Mara didn't answer. She didn't want to repeat what had happened. Saying it out loud would make it more real, more humiliating. But the truth was already written on her face. The laughter, the pointing, the way everyone had watched. It stayed with her. Don't take it to heart, the older waitress said quietly. Some people come here just to remind themselves they're above everyone else. Mara nodded, even though it didn't make the tight feeling in her chest go away. She moved to the small sink and turned on the tap, trying to rinse the stain before it set completely. The cold water helped a little. It gave her something to focus on. Something normal. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe. Out in the main hall, the night continued like nothing had happened. Glasses still clinked, music still played, money still moved from one table to another. And at the center of it all, the man who laughed was already telling another story, already moving on. To him, it was nothing. Just a small moment in a long night. But not everyone had forgotten. A few minutes later, the restaurant manager stepped into the staff area. He was a quiet man who rarely raised his voice, but tonight his face looked tighter than usual. "Is she back here?" he asked. The older waitress nodded toward Mara. He walked over slowly, lowering his voice. "Are you all right?" Mara forced a small nod. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry about the mess. I'll change and get back out there." For a second, he didn't respond. He just looked at the stain on her shirt, then at her face. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said quietly. The words surprised her. Managers didn't usually say things like that. Before she could respond, another staff member appeared at the door, slightly out of breath. "Sir," he said to the manager, "someone is asking about the girl from the spill." The room went still. The manager frowned. Who? The staff member shook his head. I don't know. One of the private tables. They didn't say much, just asked who she is. For a moment, no one spoke. Mara felt her stomach tighten again. Did they sound angry? The older waitress asked carefully. The man hesitated. No. Then what? The manager said. The staff member swallowed. Serious. That single word changed the air in the room. The manager looked back at Mara, then toward the door that led to the main hall. For the first time that night, he seemed unsure of what to do. Just stay here for now, he told her quietly. Mara nodded, confused. She had no idea why anyone would be asking about her. Out in the main hall, the night continued like nothing had happened. But somewhere among the guests, someone had noticed, and they were asking questions. Back in the main hall, nothing looked different. The music still played softly. Cards still shuffled across velvet tables. Glasses still clinked under the golden light. But for the man who had laughed earlier, something had changed. At first, it was so small, he almost didn't notice it. He raised his hand to signal for another drink. Normally, a waitress would appear within seconds. Tonight, no one came. He waited, slightly annoyed, then waved again. Still nothing. One of the men at his table leaned forward. Maybe they're short on staff tonight. The man scoffed. In a place like this? Impossible. He stood, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the bar himself. As he approached, one of the bartenders glanced at him, then quickly looked away. Another was busy polishing a glass, moving slower than before. Excuse me, the man said, placing his empty glass down. I've been waiting. The bartender nodded quickly. Of course, sir. But the drink came slower than it should have. Not late enough to complain. Just late enough to feel strange. He returned to his table, brushing it off. Maybe they really were busy. Maybe he was imagining things. The conversation picked back up. Laughter followed. Deals were mentioned. Numbers were thrown around. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, expecting a message from one of his partners. Instead, it was a call from his assistant. He frowned slightly and answered, "What is it?" Her voice came through tight. "Sir, there's a problem." He leaned back in his chair. "What kind of problem?" "Our shipment for tomorrow morning just got delayed." The driver said he was stopped and told to turn back. "Turn back?" he repeated. "By who?" There was a pause on the line. He didn't say, just that he was warned not to continue tonight. The man's jaw tightened. "Fine, we'll handle it in the morning." He ended the call, annoyed more than worried. "Business?" one of his friends asked. "Just a delay," he said, waving it off. "Nothing serious." But not even 10 minutes later, his phone buzzed again. Another call, another issue. This time, a supplier suddenly backed out of a deal they had already agreed on. No explanation, just an apology and a quick goodbye. Now the man sat a little straighter. "What's wrong?" someone at the table asked. He forced a small smile. "People are getting nervous for no reason." But deep down, something didn't feel right. Things like this didn't just happen twice in one night. He reached for his glass, but found it empty again. Irritated, he stood and looked around for a waitress. That's when he noticed something. The girl from earlier, she wasn't anywhere in sight. For a brief second, he remembered the look on her face when the wine spilled, the way she froze, the way the room had gone quiet before he started laughing. He shook the thought away. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. Just a waitress. Still, the service around his table had changed. It wasn't rude, it wasn't obvious, but it wasn't warm anymore. It felt distant, careful. Across the room, a few of the staff moved differently tonight. Quieter, more alert, as if they were waiting for something or someone. Another call came in. This time, his assistant sounded more shaken. Sir, I don't know how to say this, but 2 more partners just pulled out. They said they don't want to be involved right now." "Involved in what?" he snapped. "They wouldn't explain." The line went silent for a second. Then she added quietly, "Sir, did something happen tonight? Did you upset someone important?" The question irritated him. "No," he said sharply. "I haven't done anything." But as he ended the call, his eyes slowly moved across the room. For the first time that night, he stopped smiling, because the problems were starting to feel less like bad luck and more like pressure. By the time the night began to slow down, the mood inside the club had shifted. Not loudly, not in a way most people would notice, but something in the air felt heavier. The laughter had softened. Conversations were shorter. Even the staff moved with a kind of quiet focus, like they were careful not to make mistakes. In the back room, Mara had changed into a spare uniform. The stain was gone, but the feeling of embarrassment still clung to her. She kept replaying the moment in her head, wishing she could go back and do something differently. Speak faster, move quicker, avoid the table entirely. But it was too late for that. She was drying her hands when the manager stepped in again. This time, his expression was serious, in a different way. "They want to see you," he said gently. Mara's stomach tightened. Who?" He hesitated for a second. "Someone important." Her heart started to beat faster. "Did I do something wrong?" she asked quietly. "No," he said quickly. "Not at all." But he didn't explain anything else. He simply nodded toward the door that led back into the main hall. "Just come with me." They walked through the narrow hallway together. The sound of the club slowly grew louder again as they got closer. Mara could feel her hands getting cold. Her mind raced through every possible reason someone might want to see her. Maybe she was being fired. Maybe a guest complained. Maybe the spill caused more trouble than she realized. As they stepped back into the hall, she noticed something strange. The room felt calmer, not empty, not quiet, just more controlled. The manager led her past the main restaurant area, past the casino tables, toward a section she had never been allowed near before. A private corner, slightly hidden from the rest of the room. A single table sat there, and at that table, a man was seated alone. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't drinking heavily. He wasn't trying to be noticed. He simply sat there, one hand resting lightly on the table, his posture relaxed but steady. A few men in dark suits stood at a distance, not close enough to crowd him, but close enough to make it clear he wasn't alone. The manager stopped walking. Mara stopped too. "Go on," he said quietly. Her feet felt heavy as she stepped forward. The man looked up. His eyes were calm, observant, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. For a moment, he just looked at her, not in a cruel way, not in a judging way, just studying her. "You're the one from earlier," he said, his voice low and steady. Mara nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." "The wine," he said. Another small nod. "I'm sorry if I caused trouble," she added quickly. "It was an accident." The man was quiet for a second. Then he said something that surprised her. "You didn't cause any trouble." His voice wasn't loud, but there was something in the way he said it that made the words feel heavy. He leaned back slightly in his chair. "What's your name?" he asked. "Mara," she replied. He repeated it once, like he was making sure to remember. "Mara." There was another brief silence. Then he asked, "How long have you worked here?" "A few months, sir." "You like it?" The question caught her off guard. It helps, she said honestly. I need the job. He nodded slowly, as if that answer told him more than she realized. Behind her, she could feel the manager standing still, waiting, respectful, careful. And then from somewhere behind her, she heard a quiet whisper from one of the staff passing by. Soft, almost afraid. That's him. Another voice, even quieter. The Mafia boss. The words barely reached her ears, but they reached the man who had laughed earlier. He had just turned the corner, still on his phone, still frustrated, still distracted, until he saw who she was standing in front of. His voice stopped mid-sentence. His face changed, and for the first time that night, he understood. The man who had laughed earlier stood frozen where he was. The phone slowly slipped from his ear, the voice on the other end still talking, still asking questions he no longer heard. His eyes were locked on the scene in front of him, on Mara, standing quietly, and the man seated across from her, the Mafia boss. For the first time that night, the arrogant confidence on his face was gone. He finally understood why the service had changed, why the calls kept coming, why deals were suddenly falling apart. It hadn't been bad luck. It had been a warning. He ended the call without a word. For a moment he considered walking away, pretending he hadn't seen anything, but something in the room made that impossible. The silence felt too heavy, too final. So he walked forward slowly. Each step felt louder than it should. Mara noticed him first. Her body tensed slightly, her eyes dropping to the floor. The memory of the laughter, the stain, the humiliation came rushing back all at once. The Mafia boss didn't turn immediately. He already knew the man was there. "Sir," the man said, his voice suddenly careful, respectful, almost unrecognizable. The Mafia boss looked up at him. Just one glance. That was all it took. The man swallowed hard. I didn't realize you were here tonight." The Mafia boss didn't respond. He simply watched him. The silence stretched, uncomfortable, heavy, unforgiving. Then the man forced a small, nervous smile. "If I had known, I would have come to greet you earlier." Still nothing. No smile, no acknowledgement, just that calm, steady stare. And in that moment, the man realized something even worse. And this wasn't about greetings. The Mafia boss finally spoke. "You laughed," he said quietly. The words weren't loud, but they landed like a weight in the room. The man's smile faded. "Sir, You laughed," the Mafia boss repeated, "at someone who couldn't defend herself." The man's throat tightened. "It was just an accident. I didn't mean anything by it." The Mafia boss turned his eyes briefly toward Mara, then back to him. "Accidents don't usually sound like laughter." The man opened his mouth again, searching for something to say. Something that would fix this, something that would undo the moment from earlier. But there was nothing, because the truth was already sitting in front of them. The Mafia boss leaned forward slightly, resting his hand on the table. "You're a powerful man," he continued calmly. People listen to you. They follow you." The man nodded quickly. "I try to do my best, sir." "Then you should know," the Mafia boss said, his voice still steady, "that the way you treat people when they can do nothing back tells me everything I need to know about you." The room felt completely still. No music, no laughter, just quiet. The man's hands were starting to shake. "I can apologize," he said quickly. "I'll make it right." The Mafia boss looked at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head once. "An apology isn't for me." Slowly, the man turned toward Mara. For the first time since the spill, he looked directly at her. Not through her, not past her, at her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low. "I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that." Mara didn't know what to say. No one had ever stood up for her like this before. The Mafia boss leaned back again. Over the next few days, the consequences came quietly. Deals continued to fall apart. Partners stopped returning calls. Invitations stopped coming. No threats were made, no scenes were created, just distance. The kind of distance that powerful people create when they no longer want to be connected to someone. And everyone understood why. A week later, Mara was called into the manager's office. She walked in nervously, wondering if something else had gone wrong. Instead, the manager gave her a small envelope. Inside was more money than she had ever held at once. "For you," he said gently, "from the Mafia boss." Her eyes widened. "For what?" The manager smiled faintly. For reminding him of something important. Before she could ask anything else, another message came. A better position, better pay, safer hours. Not as a waitress, but working inside the club, where she wouldn't have to stand in crowded rooms or be at the mercy of strangers again. She never saw the Mafia boss often after that, but sometimes when she passed through the private section, she would notice him, seated quietly, watching the room the same way he had that night. Calm, observant, silent, and every time their eyes met, he would give a small nod, not as a boss, not as a powerful man, but as someone who had simply decided that for once, the right person deserved to be protected. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share where you're watching from. Because sometimes the smallest moments are the ones that change everything.